Hello and let's talk about the Delhi elections. Delhi goes to the polls tomorrow. Campaigning came to an end yesterday. The dry day is in place. It's been a long and bruising campaign with issues of national relevance playing a vital role in the elections of Delhi, a very small state. To talk more about this, we have with us Sumedha. Sumedha, thank you for joining us.
Hi.
So I'm not going to put you on a spot by asking who's going to get how many seats, but what's the general trend on the ground that you see after reporting for a couple of weeks?
Yes, so we've been extensively looking at the voter base of both the Aam Aadmi Party and the BJP and even the campaigns. So we've been covering that very closely. What we understand from the sense on the ground is that this is not an ordinary election at all.
Exactly.
In the atmosphere that the election is coming in, it is being made into a contest of ideologies. And of course, the part of good governance is equally important. In the last 5 years, Delhi has seen very significant flagship schemes which have become models for other states as well. And for the people of Delhi, this is exactly what the contest has now come to, that if this is going to be about governance, if it is going to be about ideologies. From the areas that we have been extensively covering, we've been looking at marginalized communities which are missing from the narrative of the mainstream. Right? So we've been traveling across to unauthorized colonies. We've been meeting families of those who are working to clean our cities and to understand what affects the common person in Delhi. From what we understand, there are the schemes of the Aam Aadmi Party which have worked for the people of Delhi, which is be it the subsidies on electricity or water or the mohalla clinics that they've introduced. However, at the same time, there are multiple loopholes that the Aam Aadmi Party will have to look into if at all they form the next government. But the CAA protests have assumed a lot of importance in this election, and that should not be negated at all, given the fact that multiple areas in Delhi are witnessing continuous protesting and the kind of vicious campaign that the BJP has led. That becomes, I think, the key focus of the Delhi election, because the party has made sure that they are fighting this election clearly on issues where they're discussing CAA and NRC and, of course, the people who are protesting the contentious bills. So by making CAA the focal point in its own campaign, the BJP has sort of made this a referendum on its own policies and with very clear implications on Narendra Modi and Amit Shah, with the kind of police brutality that we saw in Delhi. And now recently there are detentions which are taking place. Yesterday itself, the police and the ministry have urged to seek permission to create a ground. Tomorrow is the voting day. It's a crucial day to sort of convert a stadium into a jail where they could perhaps control the protesters if the situation goes out of control. So with these kind of measures, it is very clear that the BJP is at a certain level rattled by what is going on the ground. And the common voter is also equally taking this into account, that the government's response to the protests, as well as the kind of reactions and the crackdown that they are planning and have successively sort of followed this policy that they've followed to sort of crack down on protesters.
So the other key player, of course, Arvind Kejriwal, who's taken a very contentious stand on the issue, to say the least, including making some provocative statements over the past couple of weeks. So is this cautious approach, so to speak, going to actually help him, or is it likely to backfire?
I think what we've been seeing is that the Aam Aadmi Party wanted to make this election primarily about what they have managed to achieve in the last 5 years. And however, with the atmosphere that we're currently witnessing, the stance has sort of not gone in their favor as such, because people were expecting them to take a more clearer view and a more comprehensive understanding of what is going on, because and what is at stake. However, at the same time, if we look at the common voter, when we traveled across to these constituencies, it becomes very clear that for a lot of the voters of Delhi, these issues that the Aam Aadmi Party is trying to push are equally important. And how much are they holding on to these issues? Because some of these schemes have in a way transformed the lives of those on the ground. However, will this translate into votes or not
Right.
is the key question. Has the BJP been able to run a campaign where they can transcend the politics of polarization and the politics of hate over good governance? That is the question that is very important and is facing the voter of Delhi.
Right. And finally, the other player, of course, is the Congress, which was completely wiped out the last time, but which may see a resurgence of some sorts. I mean, the question is how much in this election. So, is there some sort of organizational revival, or is it just a splitting of votes?
So what's interesting to note about the Congress campaign is that they have very strategically made sure that they want to capitalize on the anti-CAA protests. Another very strategic decision which was made by the Congress party was to campaign in the inward areas of the city with very prominent faces. So that is something that they chose to, I think, strategically play into, to look at who can actually bring them votes, and more importantly, where can they put their strength. Because in terms of the organizational numbers, they do not have the kind of cadre as to match up with what the BJP has on the ground. And so the Congress is trying to, I think, strategically get as much as they can out of the anti-CAA protests. But at the same time, it might just end up being a split of votes, sort of a situation in some of the key constituencies, if not all, because they've very carefully invested their leaders and planned their campaign that way.
Right. Thank you so much, Sumedha. We now move on to the release of a series of books which are about pressing issues of the day in India. Before discussing this further, here's a quick video about the books themselves. As you saw, the book series is called Waqt Ki Awaaz and it's being published by Leftword. We have with us the series editor of the books, Pranjal. Pranjal, thank you for joining us. Pranjal, so many of the books right now seem, the topics that we saw in the video, they seem very, very current. They are very, very current. But the books themselves were released, started being released much earlier. So what was the motivation behind this series of much smaller books, which are a collection of articles?
See, Prashant, the real motive behind bringing out these 100 pages books, which are cheaper, was that these material on different issues were available all across different platforms.
Right.
Right. So we thought that there's a need to bring all of these things together, make it accessible in easier language, because all of them were, most of these things were in English.
Right.
Some of the articles were written like completely fresh articles. And also the thing is that it's not easy for a normal reader to say, if he wants to read about caste or NRC or Kashmir, to go through hundreds of these websites magazines, newspapers, and see where is the relevant material, where relevant material is not there.
Right.
So we thought it's better to bring all of it together, put it in a book in different forms, in different series, and hence bring it out primarily. The other reason was that, see, bringing all the issues together in one book would mean 500 pages. Right, which would also increase the cost of the book. We wanted to reach to an ordinary reader, and that's why we chose Hindi as a language, primarily focusing the Hindi belt, where also a lot of misinformation is being spread about these issues.
Right.
So hence Hindi was chosen as a language. The cost was kept at 100. Also after discount, it might even come down to 60 or 70. And 100 pages book. So just like any magazine, for example, Frontline and Caravan, they are usually 30-40 pages magazines.
Right.
So okay, a bit extended version of that. So one person is traveling from here to there, finishes one book in one reading.
Right.
So that was the whole purpose of bringing all these things together.
Right. So taking the discussion a bit beyond this, you mentioned how, especially in the northern parts of the country, there's this flurry of misinformation, and there is actually a need for a considerable amount of information. So could you talk a bit more about the misinformation, setting the context?
So for example, let's start with the book on NRC, which is called Nagrikta Ka Kagzi Khel.
Right.
Though the book focuses only around the NRC process in Assam, but when the final list came out, there were 1.9 million people who were outside the list.
Right.
Now there's this continuous thing that the government is saying that it has nothing to do with the minorities. It's not discriminatory in nature. But if you look at the numbers, and the Minister of State in the Parliament says that we've asked the detention centers in Assam to let all non-Muslims go out of detention center,
Right.
which means that technically the Muslim illegal immigrants who are there, they'll stay.
Right.
So this shows what has been the nature of the thing.
Right.
Now the NRC process in Assam has gone through various levels of documentation.
Right.
Now when BJP campaigns or any other leaders of the BJP campaign in these Hindi belt areas, they're saying no documentation will be required if you are a resident of the country. You don't need to prove anything and all that thing that they have been talking about. But it's necessary for people to know that what has happened in one state, which was chosen as a model to experiment primarily.
Right.
So just to break that thing, that book is an important factor. Similarly with Article 370 in Kashmir, there has been a lot of misinformation in the Hindi belt about how there was no employment in Kashmir, there were a lot of land issues in Kashmir, there was no development in Kashmir, economic parameters were low. But if you go through the book on Kashmir, which is called Sikurta Loktantra Sulakta Kashmir, you see that how Article 370 in a way has helped in uplifting the economy of Kashmir up to some extent. Kashmir is good on all the health indicators, education indicators and all. So to break all those information and to shed that misinformation basically, I think these books are quite relevant in that context.
Right. And a key aspect of the books is also the one book, the fifth book, which is also on resistance, which kind of presents a very, it's complementing, but it also presents a very different narrative.
Yes, so obviously when you look at the 4 books which is preceding the resistance book, which is called Sangharsh Hamara Nara Hai, it talks about how mob lynchings are taking place in the name of cow, how cow economy is getting affected. I talked about Kashmir, I talked about NRC, but caste atrocities. So to be honest, that 4 books paint a very grim picture of the Indian Republic right now. I'm not denying that these things are not happening. They are definitely happening, and that's why we have brought this collection together. But you also need to see that in last 6 years, there have been massive resistance to whether it's caste atrocities, lynching in the name of cow, or on agrarian crisis. All these issues have seen massive resistance.
Right.
So we thought that it's also necessary to bring out those voices that, those voices which are raising their strong voice against all these things that are happening.
Right.
And also, if you go through the book and the acknowledgements it makes, it reads in the last line, I would say it in Hindi, कि ये किताब मुख्यतः उन लोगों के संघर्ष का नतीजा है जिन्होंने अपने लेखों के जरिए अपने लड़ाइयों को लोगों तक पहुंचाया है, which means that this book is basically result of the struggles that people have carried out
Right.
in the ground, and that all the 6 books are basically dedicated to these people only.
Right. Thank you so much, Pranjal. That's all we have for today. We'll come to you from Monday to Friday at 3 o'clock every day. Keep watching NewsClick.